I never thought much about the idea that movies could predict anything. They were just stories to me, fictional echoes of someone else's nightmare. A way to pass the time, not peer into the future. War of the Worlds was always one of my favorites. The tension, the noise, the tripods rising like giants from beneath our feet, as if they'd always been there, waiting. I watched it for the spectacle, not the message. I never imagined I'd be living in it. Never imagined I'd wake up one morning and realize I wasn't in my world anymore. Because this Earth, this version of it, never moved on from the invasion. The ground still splits open, the sky still screams, and the tripods? They're not special effects. They're watching, walking, hunting, and the worst part is, nobody's telling us what happens next. I don't know how I got here. I went to sleep in my own apartment in my own world on a Wednesday night. Some thunder outside, faint flashes on the blinds. I remember watching the lights and thinking it looked cinematic. When I woke up, my power was out, my phone was dead, and the entire sky was humming. Not thunder, not wind. It was a vibration in my chest, like standing near a subway train that never arrived. I went to my window, and the city I thought I knew was cracked open. Cars were abandoned in the middle of intersections. Storefronts were busted. Sirens rang out, but they didn't sound urgent anymore. Just background noise. People weren't screaming. Not yet. They were just moving, aimless, carrying bags or holding hands or dragging dogs behind them. I opened my window and leaned out, and then I saw it. The first one. Not rising from the sky, but from the street. The pavement swelled like it was breathing, and then it broke. A ring of asphalt split open like a flower blooming too fast. From the center, something metallic pushed up, slow and groaning, like the world was giving birth to a machine. 3 long jointed legs, a body that hung from the center like a pendulum, and no face, no eyes. But I knew it could see. Everyone did. We didn't wait to be told what to do. The second its legs locked in place, we ran. I made it down 5 flights of stairs in record time. No shoes, just socks and a hoodie. I wasn't even thinking. I hit the front door, turned left, then turned again, trying to remember where I parked my car. But it didn't matter. Traffic was dead in every direction, jammed like a plug in a drain. People had already given up on driving. The tripod moved. Not fast, but far. Each step covered half a block. It didn't chase. It just followed. Picked targets, studied clusters. You didn't need sound to know when it spotted something. The light came first, a sweeping cone of pale blue that flickered like underwater sun. Then the noise high-pitched at first, then deep, like a foghorn dragged through metal. That's when people started screaming. I ducked into a laundromat and crouched behind the machines. Through the broken front window I saw the first blast. A ray of something, not fire, not light, just heat. Everything it touched turned to dust in midair. No blood, no fire, just clothing falling where people used to stand. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was a movie come to life. This was worse. The tripods didn't act like they did in Spielberg's version. They were slower, quieter, but they were everywhere. You'd turn a corner, and there'd be another, its legs rising above buildings, casting shadows that looked like arms. I stayed hidden in that laundromat for most of the day. Every time I thought it was safe to leave, another beam swept the streets. By late afternoon, the air had changed. There was a taste to it. Metal. Ash. Electricity. I think something was falling from the sky. Not rain, not snow, but threads of red dust that stuck to your skin and wouldn't come off. When I finally moved again, I didn't recognize the city. Storefronts were burned. People had stripped down to essentials, backpacks, plastic bags, whatever they could carry. I passed a woman with no shoes cradling a cat. A teenager wheeling his grandmother in a shopping cart. No one made eye contact. There were no police, no ambulances, just the sound of the tripods and the silent agreement that everyone was on their own. I heard voices coming from a boarded-up coffee shop. I knocked once, desperate, and they let me in. There were 5 people inside, a couple, 2 older men, and a kid. They didn't ask who I was, just handed me a bottle of water and pointed toward the back. We stayed there until nightfall. That was the first time I saw the vines. One of the tripods had passed nearby, and when it moved on, the ground where it had stood was different. Cracked, yes, but also covered in red tendrils. They pulsed, moved. Some kind of root system that climbed up walls and swallowed anything organic. A pigeon got caught in one. It screamed. For a while. That night, one of the old men tried to make a phone call. Nothing. No signal. No internet. A girl had a radio, one of those battery kinds with the crank. She turned it for half an hour. All static. Then, a voice. It said, "Quarantine zones are compromised. Do not travel. Do not resist. Do not resist." And then silence again. I didn't sleep. None of us did. By morning, the red vines were inside the building next door. We left. No one spoke. We split directions. I went north, toward the park, thinking I could find shelter in the trees. That was the next mistake. The tripods didn't avoid the woods. They just walked through them. Trees fell like weeds, crushed under mechanical legs. One of them passed less than 30 feet from me. I laid face down in a drainage ditch, barely breathing. Its foot stopped right beside me. Steam hissed from the ground. The vines beneath it quivered like they were feeding on the roots below. I thought I was dead. It moved on. I kept walking. No destination. Just away. Over the next few days, I learned a new rhythm. Find a place to hide before dusk. Don't run unless you hear the beam charge. Avoid crowds. Never stand near buildings with too much glass. The tripods seemed to like watching things break. I wrote in a notebook, recorded what I saw, what I felt. Maybe someone would find it. Maybe I would. It gave me something to hold on to. Eventually, I reached a diner just off the highway. It was already burned out. Ash coated the seats, but in the back, someone had left a cot, some bottled water, and a stack of maps. Hand-drawn ones, marked with dates, arrows, warnings. Don't go west, multiple sightings. Red fog by river, avoid. Safe? Check again. No names. Just signs of someone else surviving. I sat there on the edge of the cot, staring at those maps for an hour. The handwriting was steady, measured. Someone had been watching patterns, tracking movements, documenting zones like a cartographer of collapse. I traced my finger along one arrow labeled, "They circled back twice," and tried not to think about what that meant. The notes weren't scribbled in panic. They were methodical. Someone had lasted long enough to map behavior. But then came the horn. I felt it before I heard it low vibrations in the floorboards, like a train passing underground. I froze. The windows were already blown out, and the door frame hung like a broken jaw. I crawled to the front and peeked out. There it was. A tripod, maybe 500 yards away, standing in the middle of the highway. Legs rooted, head tilted forward like it was sniffing the air. No searchlight, no movement, just watching. Then came the horn. Not like the others. Slower, deeper. The kind of sound that lives in your bones after it's gone. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It felt like it came from inside me. It didn't move. Not for minutes. I stayed low and waited. Counted to 60, again and again. But the thing just stood there. It was nearly dark when it finally turned. One foot lifted and came down with a slow, seismic weight. Another. Then it turned fully away from the diner and disappeared into the hills. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just lay on the cot, holding a broken butter knife I'd found in the kitchen like it meant something. The walls creaked. Once I thought I heard footsteps on the roof, but it was probably debris falling. Or maybe not. By dawn, I was already walking. I took one of the maps, the one labeled Eastern Route. Clearer, less fog. It led toward the outer suburbs. I figured if anything was still holding, it would be there. Miles passed. The red vines were everywhere now, but thinner, like veins under the skin of the world. Sometimes they pulsed when I got close. Sometimes they didn't move at all. I learned not to touch them. Once, I saw a rabbit try to cross a patch of vine-covered grass. It made it halfway before it began twitching, spasming. Then it went still, and the vine curled over it like a blanket. I didn't eat for a full day after that. The suburbs were worse than the city. Burned-out homes, spray-painted doors with strange markings, a lot of red circles. Some homes had furniture stacked against windows like someone had tried to make a last stand. Others were eerily clean. No damage, no dust, just empty. In one backyard, I found a pile of shoes. Just shoes. Children's sneakers, high heels, sandals, all facing the same direction. I don't know what it meant, and I didn't want to stay long enough to find out. Near sunset, I found a gas station with its roof partially collapsed, but the front still intact. A few cans on the shelf. Some crackers, long expired. I sat behind the counter, chewing stale crumbs and reading graffiti, scrawled in Sharpie across the wall. One said, "It's not just machines. They brought something with them." Another, "The sky opened. The ground listened." But it was the one in red that I couldn't stop staring at. Don't breathe when the mist comes. I tried to sleep behind the counter that night, curled between fallen magazines and empty bottles. At around 3 in the morning, I woke up choking. The air was thick like wet wool in my lungs. A haze had drifted in, faintly glowing, red but not bright. It hovered like smoke, but never rose. It stayed low, curling over the floor like it had weight. I pressed a shirt over my mouth and didn't move. Somewhere outside, I heard the soft shuffling of feet. Too slow for a person, too erratic for an animal. And then, a voice. Not words, just the sound of something trying to speak. Bursts of syllables, cut short. Breathing where there shouldn't have been breath. I thought maybe I was dreaming until something passed by the front window. It wasn't a tripod. It walked on 2 legs, staggered, hunched, covered in something. Vine threads, maybe, or tubes. I closed my eyes, didn't move, didn't breathe. By morning, the mist was gone. So was the thing. I didn't talk for most of the next day. Just moved in silence, stepping over red patches, weaving through abandoned neighborhoods. Once I saw a man in the distance, kneeling in the middle of a cul-de-sac. I waved. Called out. He didn't react. I approached slowly, cautiously, until I was close enough to see that his skin was gray, and the red vines had grown through his chest like roots in dry soil. He wasn't kneeling. He was frozen upright. A statue. A warning. Eventually, I found another survivor. Her name was Erica. She'd been living in an overturned RV near the edge of a flooded quarry. I nearly got shot when I approached. She didn't say a word at first, just aimed a flare gun at me and waited for me to keep walking. But I dropped my pack, held up my hands. She didn't lower the weapon, but she didn't fire either. Eventually, she let me stay the night. We didn't talk much, just shared space. In the morning, she poured powdered drink mix into a bottle and shook it violently, like she was trying to forget something. When I asked her how long she'd been out here, she said, "Since they lifted my brother." I didn't ask what she meant. But that night, when the fog rolled in again, and we sat with our backs to the quarry wall, she told me, "They don't kill you right away. The machines. Not always. Sometimes they drink you." I looked at her. She didn't flinch. Like straws. Right through the ribcage. He didn't even scream. His face just emptied. I don't know if they eat, but they take. I didn't sleep that night either. 2 days later, Erica was gone. Just gone. I woke up and she wasn't in the RV. No signs of a struggle, no blood. Just her boots sitting neatly beside the door. I called for her, waited, nothing. It was cold that morning, the kind of cold that feels wrong for the season. I remember staring at the steam rising off the quarry water, wondering if it had always smelled faintly metallic or if that was new. The fog hadn't come back during the night. No red mist, no lights in the sky. Just silence, heavy and constant, the kind that grows louder the longer you listen. I stayed another few hours, searching in widening circles around the RV. Called Erica's name until my throat hurt. I found no tracks, no signs of movement, no trail down to the water. It was as if she'd simply stepped out of her own life and disappeared. I almost left the boots behind. They weren't mine. They weren't part of my story. But I knew that if I walked away without them, it would feel like I was trying to pretend she hadn't existed. So I tied them to my pack and left the quarry behind, heading east along the outer beltway. No cars passed. No planes. I walked down the center of a 4-lane highway lined with scorched billboards and hollowed-out trucks, their tires melted into the asphalt. Midway through that afternoon, I saw something that made me stop cold. A wall. It wasn't military. No concrete, no barbed wire, no guard towers. Just stacked cars, hundreds of them lined end to end, 3 vehicles high, some crushed flat, others upright, like toys placed by a careless child. The road bent slightly north where the line of wreckage disappeared over the horizon. In the center of the highway, a break in the wall formed a makeshift gate, half covered in chain-link fence and duct tape. A wooden sign, hand-painted, leaned against it. Welcome to the quiet zone. Do not scream, do not bleed, do not run. There was a smaller sign tacked below it. Safe. Beyond this point. Maybe. I didn't know what to expect, but I stepped through. Inside the wall, the world changed. The air was dry, still. No smell of rot or static. No red vines. The pavement was cracked, but not scorched. Some houses still had power from solar panels, maybe. Others had candles glowing behind covered windows. A few people moved slowly along the sidewalks, wearing layered clothing and wide-brimmed hats, like it was summer in a desert. No one made eye contact. No one spoke. Everyone walked like they were afraid to disturb something. I passed an open garage where a man sat whittling wood. He didn't look up, just kept carving. I asked him cautiously, "What is this place?" He paused for a moment, but didn't raise his eyes. A mistake that never got corrected. Then he nodded toward the deeper part of the neighborhood. "If you hear the music, go the other way." That was all he said. I stayed in an abandoned duplex that night. The couch was lumpy but dry. In the bathroom, someone had taped over the mirrors and scratched words into the tile grout. They hate their own reflection. I tried not to think about what that meant. I made a small meal out of a can of peaches and some crackers. No fog came that night. No sound. Even the insects were silent. Just long stretches of nothing, broken only by the ticking of a plastic wall clock that still worked somehow. At around 3 in the morning, the silence broke. Not with screaming, not with thunder, but music. Faint, distant, just at the edge of hearing. A tune I half recognized from somewhere, a slow, warped version of a lullaby, or maybe an old waltz. It came from the north end of the cul-de-sac, rising from behind the hedgerows and over the rooftops. I couldn't tell if it was recorded or being played live, but it echoed in a way that made the air feel heavier with every note. I didn't go toward it. In the morning, I checked the area. No signs of fire, no smoke, no tripod tracks. Just the lingering feeling of wrongness. That music, whatever it was, had touched something in the bones of the place, and the others in the neighborhood knew it. They walked more slowly that morning. No one left their homes. At noon, I met someone named Jonah. He was repairing a fence using parts of an old swing set. His hands were rough, bandaged in places, and his shirt was stitched in ways that showed he hadn't owned a new one in years. He saw me watching, and finally gave a slow nod. "You from outside?" I nodded back. He motioned me over. "Don't stay long. The zone only works if it stays quiet. and newcomers bring noise. I asked him what the tripods avoided, why the red vines hadn't crossed the wall, why it was quiet here when everywhere else was dead or burning. He shrugged, hammered a bolt into place. No answers. Not real ones. Some say the zone was already like this before they arrived. Others say we made it by accident. A noise void, like a blind spot in their hearing. Is it safe? He gave me a look. Nowhere is safe, but here, you last longer. I helped him repair the rest of the fence. He offered me a bowl of thin stew afterward. In exchange, I shared a drawing I'd made of a tripod I saw near a rail yarda, tall one, with different legs, more like stilts, and a curved head with what looked like antennae. Jonah stared at it for a long time. That one's new. Or rare. You're lucky it didn't see you. He tore a piece of his notebook and gave it to me. A sketch of a different, one fatter, squatter, with arms that hung low. Don't go south, he said. I thanked him and stayed another day. But something about the place made it feel borrowed, temporary, too still. Like the quiet wasn't natural but imposed. I began hearing small noises at night. Whispers through the vents. Not voices, exactly, but patterns. Breathing. The next night, the music returned. This time, closer. It played just beyond the window. The same warped melody, but slower. I pressed myself to the floor, held my breath, and stayed there until morning light peeled across the blinds. I left at dawn. Didn't say goodbye to Jonah. Didn't check to see if others had made it through the night. I just walked. The further I got from the quiet zone, the louder the world became. Not normal sounds, no engines, no planes but ambient life, crows calling, branches snapping, distant echo of a radio jingle playing from somewhere I never found. I crossed an overpass littered with wrecked sedans and pieces of torn clothing. On the other side was a service tunnel. I took it. At the midpoint, graffiti lined the walls. Spirals, red hands, warnings written backward. One message said, "The blood is not theirs." Another, "The mist leaves something behind." I slept in the tunnel that night, listening to water drip from the ceiling. No tripods, no lights. Just the sensation that I was being watched from deeper down, past the curve I hadn't explored. In the morning, I climbed out and headed for a town marked on the map from the diner. Lowe's End. It didn't look like a town. It looked like a memorial. Rows of burned-out buses surrounded the entrance road, each one blackened and caved in, like someone had used them as barricades, and then set them ablaze. There were bodies, long decayed, still wearing seatbelts. Signs posted along the gravel shoulder. We tried to wait. The sky never cleared. The children went first. Inside the town limits, nothing moved. The red vines were thicker here, but dry. Cracked, like old wires. The buildings stood, but windows were painted over in black or covered with cardboard. I passed a bar with the door wide open, and a sign hanging off its hinges that read, "The last round's on me." It wasn't just dead here. It felt post-death, like grief had stained every corner of the place and left it in pause. And then I saw her, a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, standing in the middle of an intersection. She didn't run, didn't wave, just looked at me. She wore a white raincoat streaked with red dust. No shoes. I stepped forward slowly, raising a hand. She didn't move. Then something behind her shifted. I blinked. There, rising just beyond the buildings, was a tripod. Different from the others. Taller, leaner. Its limbs curved slightly inward, like it had grown instead of been built. It didn't move toward me. It leaned down and opened something. A sound poured out, not a horn, not a beam, but a deep, layered note that made the world vibrate like a struck tuning fork. It went on for what felt like hours. It wasn't loud in the traditional sense. It wasn't something you heard so much as felt, like standing on the deck of a ship and realizing the ocean beneath you had begun to churn. That note didn't pierce, it expanded, reached inward, found things in you that you didn't know could react to sound. My stomach turned. My fingers twitched without command. My vision blurred at the edges, not from fear, but from a pressure that grew behind the eyes. When I ran, I didn't do it out of instinct. I did it because staying still felt like the world was about to collapse inward and drag me into itself. I don't know how far I got. My boots tore open halfway through the next town. I lost the water bottle I'd duct taped to my belt. My throat burned. I passed neighborhoods where the buildings looked slouched, like the very structures were reacting to that sound, caving just slightly under the weight of it. In one parking lot, I found a school bus fused into the ground by some black resin-like substance. I didn't stop to examine it. I just kept going. I didn't want to know what that sound had changed, or what it was still changing. Eventually, the note faded. Not all at once, but like fog thinning at sunrise, layer by layer, edge by edge, until I could think clearly again. I stopped behind a fallen billboard near what used to be a grocery store and forced myself to breathe evenly. My ears rang in its absence. The silence afterward was wrong, hollow, as if everything in the landscape had stopped listening. I didn't sleep that night. I was too afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd hear it again. That tone, that summons. And maybe it was one. The next few days blurred together. I walked mostly at dawn and dusk, taking shelter during the brightest hours. The tripods, at least the older models, the ones I recognized from those first few days, seemed less frequent. I'd see them in the distance, sometimes trailing across farmland, sometimes paused mid-step, as if listening for something else. The red vines began to change, too. Some of them no longer pulsed. They had stiffened, hardened like rusted cables, and a white frost, maybe fungal, maybe chemical, grew in patches where the roots clustered around metal. I began seeing structures. Alien ones. They weren't towers. Not really. More like pods or receivers. Curved, smooth, built into the sides of buildings as if grown from them. One had split an old post office in two, shoved straight through the roof like a seedling erupting from concrete. Whatever material it was made of didn't reflect light normally. I only knew it was there because of the way it distorted the air around it. Warm haze, buzzing silence. The closer you got, the more your skin tingled. I learned to give them wide berth. In one town, Keating, if the faded sign was to be believed, I found a group of people living in a theater. They had blocked all entrances except one side door, painted the windows over, and strung foil across the ceiling in patterns I didn't understand. They let me in only after I stood in full view for an hour, hands raised. Inside it smelled of burnt plastic and sweat, but they had light. A small generator powered off biodiesel, and a handful of flashlights. They called themselves the Grounders, mostly middle-aged, a few kids. One elderly man named Wilkes, who kept a book full of hand-drawn diagrams of the tripod, hundreds of sketches, each labeled with date, time, and behaviors. He showed me one he called the listening one. It didn't move like the others. It didn't scan or chase. It just stood on high ground, rotating slowly, emitting short clicks. Wilkes said he believed it was taking inventory of human activity. They're not just hunting, he told me one night as we shared a can of beans. They're learning, cataloging, not like predators, like surveyors. They don't need to kill. That's incidental. They're mapping us. I stayed with them for 3 days, long enough to realize they were barely holding together. One woman had started sleepwalking. Another kept muttering strings of numbers under her breath. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, drew the same tripod over and over again, its legs too long, its center mass too low, like it was stooping down to look directly into the viewer's eyes. None of the others talked about the note I'd heard in Lowe's End, but I saw a crude symbol scratched into the concrete backstage, a spiral inside a circle. I'd seen that shape before. Back in the tunnel. I asked about it. No one answered. I left before things cracked. Outside the town, I found a ridge that gave me a wide view of the valley below. A small city once sat there. It was hard to tell which one. Most road signs were gone or buried. The place was half flooded, a dark swamp where rooftops poked from the water like teeth. But above it all, stood something massive. A tower, not one of ours. It was black, spiraled, and taller than any tripod I'd seen. No lights, no movement, just presence. I set up a shelter that night, behind a collapsed barn. Used some thermal blankets I found in a supply crate. Ate cold beans. I kept watching that tower, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did. But the sky did something else. Around 2 in the morning, a slow shimmer passed through the clouds. Not lightning, not northern lights. A ripple, like the atmosphere itself had been touched. I felt it in my teeth. The tower didn't react, but a few lights flickered near its base. Not from the structure, but from vehicle soar. Vehicle shafts submerged near the edge of the floodplain. That's when I knew someone had tried to fight here. And failed. The next morning I went down. It took half the day to reach the outskirts. The air grew damp, heavy with rot. My boots sank into mud that clung like glue. I passed wreckage APCs, torn open, rifles melted into the earth, helmets still strapped to crushed visors. Something had ended them fast. Not just the tripods. Something more surgical. I didn't make it to the tower. I got within 2 blocks before I had to stop. Bodies, lined in rows, not buried, arranged. Each one sat cross-legged, heads tilted back, mouths open, eyes gone. The red vines grew through their bodies, but not wildly, neatly. One tendril through the chest, another across the lap, coiled like seatbelts. And the worst part? Some of them looked fresh. I didn't stay long. I turned back, cut west, and followed a set of utility poles until I found dry ground. Spent the night in the shell of a veterinary clinic. Found a hand-cranked flashlight, some antibiotics, and a burned notebook that belonged to someone named Chris. Most of the pages were gone. One survived. It said, "We thought we were the virus. Turns out we were just the soil." That line stayed with me, because I started to understand something out there had planted us here. Or maybe not planted, but prepared. That these machines, these invaders, they weren't just wiping us out. They were cultivating something. I started to notice patterns. Every place where the vines were thickest, the air was warmer. Every location where the mist rolled in nightly, there were structures nearby domes, rings, receivers. Each one tuned to something. Not us. Something else. The world wasn't being destroyed, it was being rewritten. I met a man on the road named Avery. Thin, half delirious, carrying a backpack full of bird bones and tape recorders. He said he used to be an audio engineer, and he could still hear them in the silence. They layer the frequencies, he said. Like music we can't interpret. We're not even the audience. He played me one of his tapes. Static, at first, then a low tone familiar. The same note I'd heard in Low's End. But underneath it, just barely, a series of clicks. Rhythmic, measured, not random. I closed my eyes and listened harder. The clicks had intervals, 3 short, 1 long, then a pause. Then again. They didn't sound like anything organic. They weren't insect chirps or faulty machines. They were intentional, like whatever made them wanted to be understood, but didn't care if we actually could. Avery just sat there on the roadside, fingers twitching, eyes locked on the battered recorder. "It's the same every night now," he said. "Wherever I go, it follows. Same rhythm, same count. They're getting closer to something. I don't think it's us." The next morning, he was gone. His tapes were still there, wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax. A single line had been written in charcoal across the side of his pack. I wanted to know too much. I never found his body, only a trail of footprints leading into the tree line, where the earth had turned red and soft. I took one of the tapes with me, though I didn't play it again. Not because I was afraid of the sound, but because I was starting to recognize it elsewhere without the recorder, in the cracks of distant thunder, in the hum of broken power lines, in the quiet moments between wind gusts. That pattern 3 short. 1 long was embedding itself into the world. Or maybe it always had been, and I had only just learned to hear it. A few days later, I made it to what was left of the military evacuation corridor. I'd seen it marked on the diner map, traced in green marker, labeled with a question mark. It was supposed to be a northern highway used to ferry civilians to something called Sector N, though there were no further details. I found it mostly intact, relatively speaking. Long stretches of empty road, stripped clean of signs and guardrails. I passed what had once been a checkpoint or wire melted, concrete bunkers half crushed, scorch marks in perfect circles. The kind that don't come from fire or impact, but from something that left no heat behind. I followed it west, keeping the old sun-bleached lane dividers in sight. Here and there, I found remnants of resistance. Dugouts, trenches, makeshift anti-vehicle barriers fashioned from rebar and wire. But no soldiers. Only silence. In one dugout I found a corpse still, wearing desert camo, slumped forward in a folding chair, helmet resting in his lap. A hand-drawn card was pinned to his chest with a safety pin. It said, "We waited. They didn't come." Then we stopped waiting. Past the checkpoint, the land flattened into long, dry plains. The wind carried the faint scent of rust and mold. I walked for miles without seeing another human, but I did see machines pieces of them. Broken ones. A leg here, half a pod there. The tripods didn't always win. Something had damaged them. Maybe our side, maybe something else. Some of the metal was charred black. Some had been pulled apart, as if by forces that didn't obey gravity or physics. Like their own kind had turned on them. I camped near a radio tower that night. The structure was listing to one side, one leg folded like a wounded animal, cables dangling like snapped tendons. But the base was dry, and there was an old shack nearby that offered some shelter. I found a water pump that still worked after a dozen tries. The water tasted like iron and mildew, but it didn't kill me. I took that as a win. While watching the sky, I saw lights again, nothing like aircraft. These moved without pattern, without logic. A triangle of faint white points shifting rapidly, too fast to be natural, too erratic to be our own. They pulsed, then vanished behind high cloud cover. No engines, no sound. I marked the time. Just past 2:00 a.m. That was when I noticed the vines nearby had changed color. They were turning black. It wasn't a healthy black. It looked rotten, diseased. Parts of the ground were crusting over with a flaky surface, like the infection had reached some critical mass and started to decay under its own weight. The world wasn't just being colonized. It was being worn out. The next day, I met someone named Lena. She walked up behind me while I was picking through a roadside rest stop, her hands raised, a scarf covering the lower half of her face. I almost fired my flare gun out of panic. We stared at each other for a long time before she spoke. "I saw your smoke last night," she said, her voice hoarse. "You're the first person I've seen in 6 days." She had a rifle with no rounds, a backpack full of wire, and a guidebook about edible plants that had been duct taped shut. She told me she used to work at a botanical lab before everything fell apart. "People used to joke about invasive species," she said. "Now we're the ones that don't belong." We walked together for a few days. Didn't talk much. It was safer that way. The tripods were sparse out here, but something else was happening. I noticed that animals were gone, no just in hiding, but truly absent. No birds, no insects, no distant rustling in the trees. The world was flattening into silence. Lena noticed it too. "Nothing's nesting anymore," she said as we passed an abandoned farmhouse. "They know what we don't." On the third night, we found a signal. It came from a battery-powered emergency radio I'd been carrying for weeks. The reception had always been static until then. A burst of beeping woke me just after midnight. I sat up, turned the volume slowly, and caught a voice. Garbled. Male. Repeating. "Shelter 2, 7 Alpha. Avoid urban zones. Repeat. Shelter 2, 7 Alpha, active. Beacon code 9-3. Then silence. We looked at each other. We didn't celebrate, didn't smile. We both knew better. But we began walking north the next morning. Even if it was false hope, it was direction. The shelter, if it existed, was in a ravine near a dried-up lake bed. We hiked for nearly 2 days before we found it buried under brush, camouflaged with rusted sheets of steel and fallen branches. There was a door, a real one, heavy, reinforced. A small keypad, covered in dust, blinked red. We knocked. Nothing. We waited hours, camped beside it, rationing food and listening. Eventually, the door clicked. A speaker crackled. Code? Lena stepped forward. Beacon code 9-3. The door stayed silent for a long moment. Then it opened. Inside was another world, cooler, dimly lit, air that didn't stink of rust or dust. A woman met us at the entrance, eyes heavy with suspicion, but not unkind. She led us through a narrow corridor to a main chamber where maybe 30 people sat or slept in quiet clusters. There were bunk beds, old tech, a water recycler, even a pantry with sealed emergency rations. The shelter wasn't a haven, but it was the first place that felt human again. We stayed 3 nights. I learned things. The people here had been underground for over 2 months. They didn't dare surface often. Their radio system picked up only fragment signals bouncing off whatever was still in the atmosphere. Some said the machines were adapting. Others believed they were waiting for something. But what chilled me the most was a man named Cal, who showed me their records. He'd been a geologist once. In his logs he noted tremors. Regular ones. Patterned. Not natural. Every 40 hours, like clockwork, he told me, pointing to seismograph readings drawn by hand. They're not random. The pulses come from deep underground, below the bedrock. I stared at the drawing's jagged lines, subtle but consistent. Not sharp like an earthquake, but deep, rolling motions, like something massive was shifting far beneath the surface. I asked him if he thought the tripods were tunneling. He shook his head. This isn't them. Not the ones up top. This is something older. It feels like the tripods were just the vanguard, like they weren't the architects, just the tools. Later that night, I lay on a bunk in the shelter, staring at the ceiling's rusted ventilation grates, and tried to imagine what could be older than the machines tearing apart the world above. The idea made my stomach turn. All this time I'd thought the tripods were the worst of it, the invaders, the monsters, the war. But Cal's words clung to me like humidity. What if they weren't the war? What if they were the cleanup crew? Or worse, the messengers. The shelter wasn't built for comfort, but it was built to last. Corridors were narrow, lined with modular steel, bulkheads insulated with rubber layers meant to dampen outside vibrations. There were no windows, just recycled air and solar backups running off old panel arrays disguised on the surface above. The people living here 32, by last count, spoke in low voices. There was no laughter. The youngest person was a 16-year-old named Lila who rarely left her bunk. The oldest, a retired utility foreman named Harris, spent every morning sweeping the hall with a broken broom. No one asked him to. He just did it. I think it gave him something to control. On the 5th day, something changed in the rhythm of the pulses. Cal noticed it first. I was with him in the comm room, watching the needles dance faintly across the paper like nervous fingers. He stopped suddenly, leaned in, and muttered, "There. Did you see that?" The baseline shifted. He pointed to the amplitude, a subtle rise. I could barely make sense of it, but he was sure. "The signal's getting stronger," he said. "Whatever's underneath us, it's moving closer." I asked him how close. He didn't answer. That night, Lena pulled me aside. She'd been quiet since we arrived, eyes locked on a spot just past the corridor light, as if she could see through the walls. "We shouldn't have stayed this long," she whispered. "They know we're here. That tone, the low one, it's like sonar. And the shelter reflects it. You think we're a target?" She didn't blink. "I think we're a bell. And something's listening for the ring." The next morning, the ventilation ducts groaned. Not from pressure, from something outside. The tremors started earlier than expected. Instead of 40 hours, they came at 38, then 35. The pattern was accelerating. Cal didn't bother with tape anymore. He scratched times into the metal walls with a utility knife. I saw the lines grow closer together each day, like a countdown. Then, 2 days later, during the quietest moment of the afternoon, the shelter lights dimmed. The red bulbs kicked in automatically, casting everything in that soft emergency glow. A low hum began in the walls. At first I thought it was the generator, or a systems check, but Cal's eyes widened. No, that's not us. It was a new tone, lower than the others, like someone had taken the original broadcast and dropped it 3 octaves. The walls shook. The air grew dense. The sound wasn't piercing, it was weight. Pressure. The kind of vibration that bypasses hearing and settles in your chest like an extra heartbeat. People panicked. Not screaming. Just a collective murmur. A silent understanding that this was different. Lena grabbed my arm, pulled me toward the back hallway, where the escape ladder led to the surface. "If they're coming," she said, "I want to see them before they find me." We climbed in near silence, only the creak of our boots on the rungs. Near the top, we waited. Lena eased the hatch open an inch and peeked through. No noise, no machines in sight. We emerged just after dusk. The sky was overcast. The clouds tinged a soft pink gray from some unnatural light source hidden beyond the horizon. The air was warmer than usual, thick with moisture and tinged faintly with iron. In the far distance, flashes lit the clouds, not like lightning, but pulses, like strobes. And the ground wasn't still. It was breathing. The dirt beneath our feet rose and fell in soft, rhythmic motion stew, wide to be natural, too gentle to be mechanical. It was like standing on the chest of a sleeping animal, except it wasn't asleep. It was listening. That's when we saw them. Not tripods. Not even machines. Shapes. Tall, robed figures, moving just beyond the tree line, almost translucent. Not glowing, not shuffling, but gliding. There was something impossibly smooth about their movement, like a film running at the wrong frame rate. I blinked, and they seemed to blur. Not because they were fast, but because our eyes weren't meant to track them. They didn't make sound. No footfalls, no breathing, just the low tone that surrounded them like gravity. We backed down the ladder slowly. Didn't speak. Didn't tell the others what we saw. We didn't need to. They heard it too. That night, a child began humming the tone in his sleep. Perfectly. Cal tried to wake him. The boy didn't move, just kept humming. Louder. The pitch increased. Others woke and gathered near the bunk, unsure whether to intervene or run. The boy's eyes opened, but they didn't look around. They stared forward, blank. The pupils dilated to full black, still humming. Then he stopped. Collapsed. Alive, breathing, but not present. The next day, 4 more began humming. And then came the whisper. Not speech, not human. It moved through the ducts, slow and deliberate, like someone brushing fingertips across steel pipes. The shelter began to feel smaller, claustrophobic. The lights flickered too often. The generator began drawing power faster than it should. The air recycler failed for 4 minutes before restarting. But the worst part, the thing none of us wanted to say aloud, was that the pulses from underground had stopped. Whatever had been moving toward us, it was here now. I asked Cal if we could run, if there was another shelter, if we could scatter. He shook his head. "They're not chasing us," he said. "They don't need to. They're pulling us toward them. Every tone, every pulse, it's not a weapon. It's a net." Some people began to pray. Others sat in silence, backs against the wall, clutching each other's hands like passengers waiting for a train to hit them. Lena disappeared into the escape shaft for a few hours. When she came back, her face was blank. I asked what she saw. She didn't answer, but she handed me something. A feather, red, burned at the edges, and said, "It's not overground anymore." That night, the shelter shook. A deep, bone-grinding vibration, like tectonic plates tearing slowly apart. The walls groaned, lights popped, and the lowest corridor of the supply hall collapsed inward. We lost 7 people. We tried digging. We couldn't reach them. There was no cave-in, just absence. The corridor didn't fill with debris. It folded into itself, like it had never existed. Cal said the readings confirmed it. "Space is changing," he told me. "Down here, around us. It's not just physics. It's rewriting." By dawn, the door wouldn't open. The hatch to the surface jammed. Manual overrided it. Even the ladder, when we tried to climb, felt different, like the shaft had stretched, as if we were no longer under the ground we'd entered from. Something had cut us off. And I knew then, without being told, that the invasion wasn't about extermination. It was about transformation. The world wasn't being destroyed. It was being reshaped molecularly, spatially, environmentally. The rules were coming undone, and we were trapped at the edge of something we couldn't see. The changes inside the shelter came slowly, at first subtle shifts in temperature, color, gravity. Then they accelerated. Shadows began bending the wrong direction, curling toward light instead of away from it. Sound changed shape. Whispers carried across rooms before a mouth even opened. We were being acclimated, assimilated. I stopped using my watch. Time no longer moved in a straight line. Hours stretched or vanished. I'd fall asleep for what felt like minutes and wake to find the others aged. Or maybe it was me. Maybe I was slipping behind. The metal walls developed texture. Not rust or wear, but organic patterns, veins, or roots pushing just beneath the surface. Lena said they pulsed when she touched them. I never tested it. I was afraid of what might pulse back. Cal spoke less with words and more with drawings. Chalk spirals on the floor, ringed glyphs, dotted patterns that resembled constellations. Only none of us recognized the skies they came from. "The layout's wrong," he muttered once, fingers trembling. "It's not a map. It's a mold. They're shaping us." The air changed too. Smelled sweeter, softer. It didn't feel like oxygen. It didn't feel like anything I'd ever breathed. But we didn't cough. We didn't collapse. We adapted. It scared me how easily our bodies accepted what they should have rejected. Like we were always meant to fold into whatever system they were imposing. And above it, always the tone. That low, layered hum, woven into the vibrations of the shelter's bones. Not mechanical anymore. Melodic. Almost like a song. At times I'd catch my own mouth shaping the notes without realizing it, like my breath had been taken over. One afternoon, I found Lena in the hallway, eyes closed, swaying gently. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Only when I touched her shoulder did she snap out of it. She didn't remember standing up. She didn't remember humming. We stopped counting days. Stopped calling ourselves survivors. That word didn't fit anymore. You survive something that ends. This wasn't ending. The red plane outside the one we glimpsed through the translucent wall was becoming familiar. I began dreaming of it every night, walking barefoot across it, the dust soft as ash, the sky pulsing like lungs. In the distance, I always saw them, those tall, smooth figures. They didn't speak, they didn't move in anger, they simply gestured, held out hands, invited. I never accepted in the dreams, but I always woke up wanting to. Others began disappearing. Not violently, not suddenly, they just faded. I'd see someone in the hallway one morning, and by that evening they'd be gone. No screams, no doors opening. Just empty beds and faint impressions on the floor where they'd last stood. Cal left a note scratched into the wall above his bunk. I understand now. We were never invaded. We were offered a way forward. Lena stayed longest. She resisted with quiet grace. But eventually she began drawing the spiral two-knot with chalk, but with her fingernail, over and over again in the frost that now crept along the walls, like breath on glass. She didn't fight when the time came. She stood at the far end of the corridor, face calm, mouth slightly open as the hum grew louder, the tone purer. I tried to hold her hand. She stepped back into the light that bled through the bulkhead and vanished without sound. No light burst, no swirl of wind, just gone. I was the last. The shelter was empty except for me, though I no longer felt alone. The walls seemed to watch. The floor responded to my steps like skin. I felt carried, cradled. It didn't frighten me anymore. Some part of me had already crossed over. I kept recording my thoughts in the logbooks. Not that I expected anyone would find them. Not here. Not wherever this place was becoming. But writing helped hold shape. Gave my mind something to cling to as reality continued, peeling outward. The outside world, if it still existed in the same shape and ever, came to rescue us. No military return, no recon teams, no sudden reversal of the invasion, because there was no reversal, no war to win, no countdown to salvation. I remember the first time I heard the tripods above ground. Weeks ago now, how alien they felt. But now I wonder if we misunderstood them entirely. They weren't weapons. They were signals, amplifiers, shepherds. They didn't conquer Earth. They converted it. The soil accepted it. The air adjusted. The light obeyed. And now it was our turn. I opened the hatch myself. This time, it worked. The metal slid away without resistance, like a muscle relaxing. And I stepped into something not quite Earth anymore. The sky was a red lattice, no sun, just layers of pulsing color, woven like silk in a breeze that didn't stir. The ground shimmered with spores or dust maybe, both soft underfoot, alive somehow. Shapes moved in the distance, tall, slow, watching. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked. Each step felt easier. Like gravity had been replaced with something more forgiving. The tone the hum was no longer around me. It was inside. My chest vibrated with it, not painfully, comfortably, as if I had found the frequency I was always meant to match. A shape approachedon of the tall ones. Its features were unknowable, not because they were hidden, but because they didn't stay fixed. They flowed, shifted. It raised a hand, and I raised mine. Not to fight, not to surrender, to answer. Its arm extended not to touch but to envelop. I closed my eyes, and in that instant, I felt what it was. Not a creature, not a god. A bridge. A biological structure built for passage between worlds, between systems, between forms. And I was crossing. Not in body. Not entirely. But something deeper. My mind expanded, stretched. I could see behind me, literally and metaphorically. I saw the timeline of this place, from before the first tripod rose to after the last human kneeled. I saw the echo of my own arrival, the moment I crossed into this version of Earth, that forked sliver of parallel decay. I had thought it an accident. It wasn't. I had been brought. Not as a warning, not as a witness, as a test. And I had passed. The sky brightened not with light, but with comprehension. The shapes drew closer, not to consume, but to surround. We were becoming the next phase of something much larger than humanity. Not extinct. Not defeated. Evolved. No governments would rise again. No broadcasts would resume. No war of the worlds would end in a final stand. It would end quietly, patiently, with transformation, with each of us turning slowly toward the tone and finally recognizing it for what it was. Not a weapon. A welcome.